one of the subscribers asked this question about that gold camera, that ultraviolet camera. And he said this, he says, why do they have so many photographs of that from that ultraviolet camera of the Earth, and yet why isn't there any photographs of the Earth from the Hasselblad cameras where you get such beautiful photography if you pointed it back at the Earth? And one of the first things you're going to do is when you step out and get that camera in your hand is you're going to point it back at the Earth because that's your home. Yeah. So what's going on here? Why do we only have a great many photos, especially on Apollo 16, of the Earth? It's just snap, 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 snap. But we don't have anything of the Hasselblad. Nothing, really, of the Earth. I mean, a big center Earth right in the center of the screen when they're walking on the moon. All they need to do is get out of the rover, look back at the Earth, snap, snap, snap. But no, they go and they'll take 10 photos of the same rock that's laying on the ground, which is pretty much meaningless. And yet they won't just go like this, move the camera up a tiny little bit and just say, oh, wait, there's the Earth out there in all of its glory. Let's take a photo of that. No, they take 10 photos of a silly rock laying on the ground because it's beside where they put the gnomon.
Robert, you have to be on the lunar surface to be able to tilt the camera up to look at the Earth. There's where the problem is. They weren't there, so they couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with the rover. Bounce, bounce, bounce. These guys are off the rover, then they take the equipment, then they're loading it, then they take the film out of the camera, throw it into the bag, the rover's shaking around. And yet, how come they still get a signal back to Earth when that dish is being bounced all over the place? That's another one. I mean, come on, man. You'd try doing that at home. Just go out and just touch your little satellite dish out there outside of your window. Watch how fast all your channels go goodbye. Yeah. And yet these guys could just be bouncing around and moving the rover all over the place, and that signal's rock solid. It doesn't even move. It doesn't even flicker. That other one that I found recently of the astronauts, again, they're going across with the cameras mounted on the rover, and oh, wait a minute, now the shadows just changed again from one side to the other. And then when we get to the other side where the rover is, guess what? The astronaut shadows just changed back to the left. But when they were over there, it was on the right. The rover hadn't moved. The astronauts moved, but the rover hasn't.
And the technicians switched the wrong lights off.
Oh yeah, that's right too. They go dark. They're lit up like a Christmas tree, and then they go dark. And then when you look at the backpacks, they say, oh, well, the PLSSs. You look at the PLSSs at the bottom, and the proponents are saying that the regolith is 13-something% reflectivity. But yet, why isn't the bottom of those packs, they're not lit up, right? So they move over this way, move over that way. They're a little bit in shadow, yeah, but the backpack, the PLSS, is still in the sun. So that means that the regolith, if it's that reflective, it should be at least lighting up the bottom of that PLSS, and we don't see that.
Yeah, because it's the same reflectivity as tarmac here on Earth. About 8, 10, 12%, depending on where they are, depending on what the surface is. The reflectivity is relatively low, and it's not recordable by photographic film. And this is the point most people miss. Photographic film has a very limited range of recordability, depending on the exposure. You've got to get the exposure right, or the film will not record it correctly. If it's too dark, it's because it's underexposed. If it's too bright, it's because it's overexposed. You've got to get the exposure correct. But you can't see the dials on the Hasselblad cameras. You can't see the readings to put it on the correct aperture or the correct shutter speed, let alone focusing. Oh no, the proponents will say, they use wide-angle lens, so you don't need to focus it. No, but you still got to get the aperture right and the shutter speed right. Otherwise, you wreck the photograph because they didn't use digital. Hadn't been invented then. It was only photographic film. And if you know how photographic film works, and its limitations, you can immediately see in many of the Apollo photographs, these limitations were exceeded by considerable margins, such as the exposure.
Didn't NVIDIA, when they were doing that stuff on the reflection, didn't they boost the reflective up to 21% or something?
Yeah, it was something that Jarrah White eventually got.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 9%, they boosted it to 21. I just noticed that in the video that you just posted today, right there at 1348, you got Harrison Schmitt right there with his helmet wide open, no bubble helmet, no nothing.
It's really crazy. When I looked in the editor and cleaned that up a little bit more, you could see that there is no way he has the inner helmet on, because you see the sun. The sun should be reflecting off that inner helmet. You get a double exposure of the sun if there's two, because you have the visor, then you have the helmet. As soon as he turns his head, the sun would also be out of phase with the helmet behind it. You get a double reflection, and you don't. Watch when he turns his head. That's the giveaway.
He's turned it there.
In other words, the sun's reflection, it should be a double reflection because there's another piece of glass behind there.
There's the band where the helmet would connect. His cheek is actually exceeded past that. When you watch the whole video, his nose actually sitting right over top of where the bubble helmet would sit. And because the bubble helmet's a different shape, it would have a reflection down in here on it as it curves around.
Yeah, the bubble helmet itself, the inner helmet, you would have a double reflection because you have a reflection that's coming off of the visor, and then you have that other piece of glass, that's the bubble helmet behind it. So when he turns his head, the bubble helmet is more concave shaped. So you would expect to see a double sun there.
Quite right, it should be.
You see, these guys smoked cigarettes, and they couldn't possibly have to take all that suit apart if they could just lift that visor and have a cigarette. That'd be a hell of a lot easier, because otherwise they'd have to undo all that gear, take that bubble helmet off. And plus, running around on Earth like that, they could lift that up and get more airflow through that suit in between their filming. No, it's definitely not there. Anybody that's out there that are making comments, if they think we're being rude or whatever, just cutting these people off that are coming on the channel as trolls and stuff,
Yep.
If they identify themselves, if they have a channel there that identifies them, they come on as unknowns, make the rude comments, we'll just knock them out of there because there's no point in having them. People, you get rid of them and they just create another unknown name and come on there and continue. But if they're right there and they can identify themselves, they got a no channel, they got their own videos up and stuff like that, that we know who they are, we'll spend a little more time with them because they're willing to put themselves out there themselves. They're going to back up what they're going to say. We don't have problems with people like that back it up. They can disagree with us.
Sure, yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay. We'll even have them on the show if they want to come on. Unless you happen to be drunk upside down playing a guitar on a bed in a trailer, then that's a little different. We don't care.
Has Dave McKeegan been invited to appear?
To answer your question, Dave McKeegan has been offered £400 to come on here for 60 minutes.
He's not accepted.
Nope. And he said, what's the point in going on with people who are liars? It's a waste of time.
Yeah, I was going to say, is he describing himself there?
Here's a fellow who's never worked with photographic film, nor has he worked with a photographic film camera. How many times have we shown him demonstrating digital cameras? That's all he does. I don't even think he's picked up a roll of film in his life.
Anyway, come on, Dave. You come and have a chat with us here on Apollo Detectives. I'm sure you can support your own viewpoint very persuasively. So let's hear you do it. It's interesting that more and more people are now looking at the Apollo Detectives films. They're attracted to the professionalism, and they're seeing that what we say is backed up and can be confirmed because you illustrate it.
Yeah, but I also show the documents. I have the documents running down the screen, so all they have to do is just pause the video and read it all. We're using NASA's own documentation against them because that's what they're saying.
Of course, this is the point that NASA haven't grasped yet. They put all these documents out saying, well, how could we fake something with these millions of documents standing, 10 foot high if you put them as computer readouts? How could you fake something like that? The answer is very easily. If you're shooting a major Hollywood film, how many people are involved? How much documentation is created for that film? The storyboarding of it and all the preparation work prior to it. You see the number of people involved in the credits at the end of any major film. But you never hear anything about that film before it's released. You don't get pictures of the shots being taken in the studio. You don't get people talking to the press about it because they're not allowed to. That's the way it works in Hollywood and in Britain and in India. Most countries that have commercial film operations, they all work the same way.
That's interesting that you mentioned that because my cousin, He has to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they even start the project. As the contract is being signed, that's already signed. It's in the non-disclosure agreement. Everything is in there. So you cannot do that. You realize he couldn't even send me a picture of what they were doing when they were setting all the stuff up for that production. And he says, I know you're going to ask for pictures, but I can't send it to you because it might get out. I can't. And if it does accidentally get out, then he says, and I'm responsible and I break my contract. But it is amazing how all these professionals can keep a secret like that. And then not even let the tiniest little bit out. Look at Star Wars or any of those blockbuster films. And all of a sudden, it just hits you like a ton of bricks. It's there. Wham. Just like that. And that Star Wars was such a cultural shock that people didn't even know what they were seeing at first. They were just stunned because what? The effects that were taken to a whole new level. And guess what, fellas? That was all done on optical printers.
And in camera.
You could see the power of an optical printer. Makes it look a lot more real than CGI does, a lot more real. And if you use a high-speed camera to film those astronauts in that rover and then slow it down, that's what you're going to get. Nice, bouncy, floaty feel. And that's what I say they used.
The CGI is going to catch up to them real soon.
But look at it this way. If you take models, if you make a good model like Douglas Trumbull did of that space wheel, of that space station, and then he also made the spaceships. Look how realistic those models looked. I mean, he had it all painted and shaded and everything. The lighting was correct. That outdoes anything today, in my opinion. I mean, there's no CGI that could cut that, not even come close to it.
That was done in the mid-1960s, wasn't it? On 2001: A Space Odyssey. Great Stanley Kubrick film. So Douglas Trumbull knew about using models, using periscope cameras, using projection to get a realistic life-size image. And a famous image of the spaceship flying over the camera. And it's huge. You think, wow, what an incredible shot. And it was a model about 5 foot long. That's all it was.
Yeah, the spacecraft Discovery. That was crazy stuff. I mean, wow.
It's also interesting, if you look at the famous shot of the spaceship landing on the moon in 2001: A Space Odyssey, with the astronauts watching it, you notice that the legs compress as it lands. And I think, hang on a minute, did that happen on Apollo? No, it didn't. Why not? What's going on here? So you've got all these anomalies, so many anomalies we've lost count, so many unanswered questions that nobody will address. We're not lying, we're just pointing out things that need answers. It's that simple.
You know what else is interesting about those legs? Even in Star Trek, the Klingon ship landing gear, it landed with landing gear that looked more like the back leg of a grasshopper, which is the correct way to design it, except it would not fit on a Saturn V rocket if you had those legs on there.
Space 1999, for example, look at the spaceships, the Eagles. When the Eagles come down and land on the pad, there's shock absorbers, and you can see them compress and then come back up again.
Because that's what you expect to see.
Brian Johnson got it right, and yet why can't these engineers that have gone to school for how many years and they're designing these things, they couldn't get that right on the Eagle because we don't see any compression in any of those shots. None of them.
No, big error, that one. So when they had the lander down at Cannon Air Force Base, they forgot about the compression required. But now we've spotted it, and they're trying desperately to backpedal and say, well, it wouldn't happen that way. How do they know?
Yeah, I still don't understand it when it's coming down. I found a different version of this that I've never seen before, of that simulator with the guys that are in the booth and they're raising it up and it's tilting this way and that way. And the more I look at the ground level, the more it looks like the Apollo 16 footage. Mind you, now this is underneath that crane here.
Oh yeah, there we are, the big crane at Langley, Virginia, that is.
Yeah, now watch this. This is interesting. Think about it. You know how simple that would be to set up a high-speed camera and have it going down to about here, and then pushing in like right into here, the molds of the mountains or the hills. And then because you have all the lighting already here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they're everywhere. There's look at all the lights hanging. There's another one. There's another. They're all over the place, the lights. There's the power station right over here, the generator plant. But if you did that, you would only need to do it as high as these trees here, and then the rest, you could use a filter to block out the sky. So they could do it at night. Like I said, they have the lighting already here, so they could do this whole thing at night. You know, the Apollo 16 Grand Prix, and then as long as you have everything matted right up to the tree lines, you're okay. You could have mountains of backdrop mats and just let them drop right down to the bottom here. You could have that too.
That gantry crane there is what, 300 feet high, 600 feet long, right?
This was my point when they're doing this. I mean, I'm looking at the bottom of this crazy thing here. All the craters are already blown in here. How easy would that be to pull something off like that? If you had a high-speed camera, just have the rover going in slow motion down here and you dress it up a little bit, drop mats off the crane on each end except for the fourth wall, and you could do that very easily. I'm not saying that's how they did it, but there's your generator shack here.
So you've got lights that you can control independently.
Yeah, they're everywhere up here.
Who else works at Langley, Virginia? Obviously people who know what they're doing, because they built it.
They had another one around that size to drop it into water as well.
So look, they already had the power there. They had the lighting there. All they had to do was just drop some mats down on the off of that crane of the mountains, and there you go. I mean, just looking at it, an easy way of doing it. You don't need any models. You don't need any dummies. You don't need any wires. You don't need anything. And then, of course, now we're back to the cameras on the molds.
Oh, God. Are they on the ceiling again on that one, or are they on the wall?
They're on the wall on this one.
And there it is right there again in the simulator.
We're certainly not in space.
They sure did a good job on these craters, though.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they're very good.
Some of these simulators look a lot more real than others. This was one of the first ones that they made, so it wasn't all that great. But then you come a few years ahead, and now we're really talking about some stuff. I mean, these guys went to an awful lot of trouble just for simulators.
Well, it's a good thing they did, because then they could use a lot of the simulation filming.
Why would they have a guy in a suit when he's in a simulator?
Hey, you know, that's a good question.
He has to be in the suit because they're going to film him for advertising of some kind.
Maybe that's why they had Poppy along as well, to give an added interest to it.
Yeah, well, he's got that suit on for some kind of marketing purpose.
Yeah, but he hasn't got his helmet, has he?
If they're just advertising it, here he is practicing in a simulator, right? They also added the suit, which is not necessary. So it's for marketing purposes.
I have another one of another guy in a simulator, and he's just in a shirt and pants.
Yeah.
Yeah, what would you need this for?
And that's not one of the Apollo astronauts, is it?
Nope.
Yeah.
It's not even an Apollo suit. I don't even recognize that particular suit. Unless the color's off, that could have been the company that was competing that had the blue suit with the coil and the ribs and the elbows and stuff like that. It doesn't have the bands that go across to control the arms or anything on that. It's quite a bit different in a lot of ways than any other suit I've seen.
Yeah, it's good stuff, that. Well done for spotting that. Perhaps they've just come from putting the insulation into the latest Orion spacecraft.
Did they?
I don't know.
They put some soundproofing in there too?
Well, they've got to do something, otherwise they're going to get deaf. I don't know. It's quite noisy there.
The email that you sent, I see the guy was talking about the gloves, where he said in Apollo 17, where they're taping up the fender on the rover, he says that he tried to sit there and peel with tape off with his fingers. So he's got this roll and he's trying to peel the tape off of it to start it. And then I remember what somebody said. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't use that tape outside. All of that repair was done on the inside, so they ripped it with their fingers because they had no suits on and the LEM was pressurized. And they put all the tape on inside the LEM, then they brought it out and clamped it onto the rover.
That's their excuse, isn't it? There's always something. There's always some ridiculous idea. But of course, as we well know, that tape does not work in a vacuum. The adhesive outgasses.
Yeah, so he said, why don't you guys try putting some in your chamber and see what happens? So I'm going to do that.
That's a good idea. Yeah. Just see how it works.
In other words, once I have a vacuum and the tape's in there, we bring it down till it's at least 410 to the -2, just to start with it. And then what we'll do is I'll leave it there for 24 hours. Then I'll throw the heat lamp on it, because that's the same thing the sun's doing, isn't it?
Precisely the same thing.
Well, I guess there goes another vacuum chamber because we melted the last one.
All the adhesive will outgas and it'll glue up the inside of the vacuum chamber.
Oh, you mean like it did the filter?
Make sure you got a new filter on there, because otherwise you're going to gum up the pump.
Yeah, wasn't that something when we pulled the filters apart? I had two pumps. I took a look at the filter on the new one. The one that I had when I was putting all the film in that chamber there, it was plugged right up. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get that down any further. Well, as soon as I removed the filter, just test it. I removed the filter, put the cap on, threw the pump on, down it went. It's all plugged. It's plugged up with that stuff that's outgassing because it's going up through the filter.
Well, you see, you should show what is being collected in the filter, because that's the material that's off-gassing.
When you let the air in, you have that one on the outside. So everything that's in the chamber is going to get blown right through that filter. That's the filter that we checked, and it had all these black particles in it from the film. So as the atmosphere in there is being pumped out, there's a filter up at the top. That filter was plugged worse because as it's outgassing, it's trying to still get rid of the particles in there. So they're all going up and getting trapped in that filter.
But here's the thing is, it's outgassing, and those are actually solid particles. There's materials that are outgassing that are a vapor, and it's also dislodging from the surface solid materials as well.
You know, if you've got the filter all clogged up because of what's been outgassed, it's worth showing that, because things don't just disappear. When material outgasses, you know, if you get water and it outgasses, it's basically steam, you know, and it will condense as water, because water has that remarkable property. It can exist in 3 states: solid, gas, or liquid, depending on the temperature.
See the black inside of that filter?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, that should just be a white filter.
Yeah, it's a white filter, yeah. It used to be white, but this is all the stuff. But all this black stuff is from the film that outgassed in here.
So if it's outgassing at the vacuum level you were able to achieve with your own vacuum chamber, how much worse do you think it will be on the moon?
Oh, with the increased vacuum, it would just speed that up dramatically. Even Bill demos, he says you get past that 10 to the minus 6, and then more anomalies happen and everything just accelerates. That's when the cold welding starts and all the other anomalies, because now you're affecting the surface of solid metals at that point.
Yeah, that's quite serious.
Yeah, and people don't seem to understand that. They just think that, oh, there's only that difference of 14.7. We keep seeing the comments in there all the time about it.
Yeah.
Well, just tell them to go ahead and try it.
This one's the first one. The other one was the second one. This one here only had the film in it. Yeah, the other one had the inner tube in it. It's a little cleaner.
Yeah, but it still shows there's a lot of material in there.
Oh yeah, there's still, look at the black. There's still lots of, you know, black stuff in there.
Oh, there's a lot of black stuff. And that's a relatively low level of vacuum.
Yeah, we could only get -2 with this one.
That plastic film is same as Mylar, right? Same chemical composition. That's what's outgassing and then recondensing on the filter.
This was the one that we used for the inner tube and the film. You could see it's quite filthy.
Quite bad.
This side here is actually the worst. That's the part that's on the bottom. So it actually gets the worst of it. This sits on the bottom side. So all the particles are going through here first and then out.
But all those little holes on the sides are all plugged up as well.
In certain places there, yeah, those ones are. But these top ones, this is the worst because this is where it sat. So if anybody says that the material doesn't go anywhere, like Marcus said, you're sadly mistaken.
Yeah, they are. I don't think many people actually understand the mechanics of vacuum testing. What actually happens when you put material into a vacuum? On Earth, you put it into a vacuum chamber. But have you ever seen any film at all of the Sandusky chamber being used for any Apollo equipment?
Yeah, matter of fact, they tested Artemis in there. I have one video of them putting that capsule in there. There's no humans in it, but they put the capsule in there.
Well, that's good. It's a start.
That would test the seals on the vehicle, right? But what Joyce Deaver was doing through her testing, because it was all basic materials, so they were putting different kinds of metals in there for cold welding and see how fast. And of course, the materials that are being used on the vehicle are one of the highest, like aluminum and even titanium, cold welds together rapidly, is probably one of the first ones that go on it. And the other ones in there, of course, were all of the different adhesives that they used in there.
I discovered this yesterday when I was going through the Apollo 17 film called Apollo 17 Real Stories, which of course you cannot find any longer. It seems to have vanished off the internet. But this little clip I pulled out of there. Now, what the heck are those two objects doing laying there? The first one is behind the astronaut. It looks like a punching bag or something like that. But interesting, it looks like there's 3 observation windows in there. And then when you look at it again, it looks like there is clamps on there.
It looks like a vacuum chamber cylinder with a sight window in it.
Yeah, but there's 3 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the strange thing. It almost is like there's 3 in there. Then there's this other one here. This one's from the Chang'e 6. At least that's what it said. I found it very strange that inside the crater, once again, we have an object in there with vents and panels on it that are removable. You could clearly see them where I have the arrows. And then there's this other one up here. Doesn't it look like it's half of a engine block or something like that? But the one in the crater has panels on it. Look, what is going on here?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any natural rocks there.
I mean, you'd expect it to be a layer of dust on top of those rocks.
Oh, there has to be.
Yeah. So what's going on there? And also, it's always amusing to look at that rock on the left where the shadow is. Where's this reflective property of the lunar surface that fills in dark areas?
That should be filled up just like the LEM 12 feet off the ground to the door, because you can see right into the door.
Yeah, of course it should. But it seems to only work on astronauts and equipment from Earth. It doesn't seem to work on the moon. Very strange, the whole thing.
It is, isn't it? It's strange. It just gets crazier because there's only 2 possibilities to this. One is that they've never been there and all this is just a junkyard, or 2, they have been there and another civilization has been there earlier and has left all this junk scattered around, and their favorite place to put it was inside of the craters. The craters are a big junkyard for all this stuff, and it doesn't matter if you look at the Chinese or the Apollo missions. It doesn't matter. As long as there's photos there, there's junk in those craters. Every crater has its own story.
Well, if they keep going with Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 and the James Webb Telescope finding life on another planet and all of this stuff continuing on, right? Well, Voyager's back online. It's got 4 sensors fully functional. They couldn't communicate with it, so they sent it a file to move where it's being processed from one circuit part of the circuit board to another. But they couldn't communicate with it when they were doing that. But they still sent the file, and it magically came back online. Now it's functioning, and they're saying that because it's losing some power, that cameras don't work anymore, but the other 4 sensors that they have on board are working just fine and sending them back data. It's just unbelievable how that thing at 15 billion miles away.
And so what's the power in the Voyager spacecraft to send that message back? Where's it coming from?
Well, they got an RTG in there, apparently. They upgraded it sometime 20 years ago or so and put an RTG in it instead of just the solar panels.
Well, tell them about how they remapped the circuit board. That's the craziest.
That's right. They remapped the circuit board. Of course, you can't do it remotely. You can't do it on a new piece of equipment. You can't just do that. But this old equipment, apparently, they can just move where the information is being sent through the circuit board because of the damaged ones. But the thing is they couldn't communicate with it. All they were getting is garbled information. Of course, it was turned off for a while, and it turned itself back on, too. It did that all on its own. Then it's sending garbled information. They couldn't communicate with it, but then they sent files to it while they couldn't communicate with it and moved where the data flows through the circuit board so that it now functions again. There's no way I can build a BS meter that can measure this kind of shit.